Okay, take it away.
All right, everyone. I'm giving a talk on SwiftUI today. I'll give a disclaimer right off the top. I have been writing SwiftUI for about 46 days, and I know the exact number for reasons that will become clear later on. But not super experienced, so a lot of this will be pretty surface level, but I've been enjoying learning it, so I thought I would talk about it today. SwiftUI, we can sort of cover where it came from. It was actually just introduced last year. Swift itself has been around for 5-6 years at this point. I believe they're on Swift 5 right now. And SwiftUI is now on version 2 as of WWDC this year. SwiftUI obviously written in Swift. So pretty young. This is the sort of path it has taken. And this sort of looking into this sort of corrected an assumption that I had, which was that Swift was building on Objective-C, which is incorrect. It's actually an alternate fork, like an alternative to Objective-C, and it is the recommended path that Apple prescribes going forward to build apps. And actually, Swift is written in C++, so a little bit different. Although the interesting thing is that you can run Objective-C code in Swift. So I'm not going to get into that, but interesting thing, a lot of crossover between all that stuff. As I said, it's the recommended way to write modern apps for all of Apple's platforms. You can actually write a SwiftUI app that will run on macOS, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, and tvOS. And it's not too much of a leap to get it on all those. You can just kind of write a basic app and then do small tweaks to sort of optimize it for each one. So it's pretty powerful in that way. They hadn't really had anything like that before. What is SwiftUI? This is directly from their developer docs. It has a declarative syntax that's easy to read, natural to write. SwiftUI works seamlessly with the new Xcode design tools to keep your code and design perfectly in sync. It has automatic support for dynamic type, dark mode localization, accessibility, all things that Apple deems are very important things right now and are important, especially like dynamic type. That's sort of a part of accessibility, but that is a very important thing to Apple. So just having that come in the box is a great thing. So I'm going to dig into this quote a little bit. Declarative syntax. Here's a list of the different views. When you're working with SwiftUI, you're mostly thinking about basically just composing the UI that you want through these different views that Swift provides. And they literally have like a one-to-one relationship with what you see on the screen. So there's text field, a picker, button, etc. And so when you're writing an app, you have the design for what you want to put together, you are literally thinking like, okay, this is a picker. I'm just going to drop a picker in the code. And we'll get into that a little bit more later as well. Another very important aspect of SwiftUI are modifiers. And you can apply modifiers to any view. And these basically, you can apply a modifier to a view and that will return a new view that was modified with the modifier that you applied to it. And that can add like styles, or can change behavior even. You'll apply like animations through modifiers, or change the color of something, background, change the keyboard type that is triggered with an input, stuff like that. So actually a pretty powerful thing, and pretty accessible to use. It's just very straightforward. To get into what the code actually looks like, here's an example, a very basic example. You're importing SwiftUI. This is a home component. So what you'll see on the screen is just the text hello. And if you were to tap on that screen, it will simply print tapped to the Xcode console. So very simple. And to my eyes, actually, I'll dig into this a little bit more. So all SwiftUI views conform to a view protocol. Swift is sometimes referred to as a protocol-driven development process. And what that means is they have this concept called protocols. I don't know how common it is in other languages. I know JavaScript doesn't really have anything like this. You could say like types in TypeScript are similar, but even that is not that close. When you create structs, you want them to conform to protocols to be able to work with them. So for instance, an example would be there's an encodable protocol, and that lets you convert data to JSON or whatever you want. And then there's decodable, which means you can convert data from JSON. And then there is a protocol that combines both of them called codable. And so that's sort of how Swift works. You've got protocols, a lot of them represent a bunch of other protocols underneath them. And that just makes them easier to work with. That you kind of know what you're working with, and Xcode also knows what it's working with based on that information that you're providing it. So in this case, everything in SwiftUI, pretty much everything in SwiftUI is a view. So you've got your main home view here that conforms to the view protocol. Text is also a view. An interesting thing in SwiftUI is that colors are also views. You're applying a color to text that is a view being applied to a view. It's a bit confusing, but that's how they do it. And so looking at this a bit further, myself coming from a React background, when I was looking at this, I thought this looks kind of familiar. And so this looks familiar. Apple hasn't outright said this as far as I know, but as a React developer, I see a lot of inspiration from React and how that works, both being declarative frameworks, in that you're basically writing code that directly represents like what you're seeing on the screen. So I believe that there's this, I don't remember where the quote was from, but I saw a React core team developer saying like, I consider SwiftUI a success of React, basically, because it seems so clearly connected to that paradigm. So this was the Swift code. And then this looks familiar. Here is the exact same component. In this case, React uses components, SwiftUI uses views. It's essentially the same thing, where we've got our home component. It has the text hello that renders to the screen, and then if you tap on that, it will log taps to the console. So the nice thing about that was there are major differences in how they are put together, but the syntax is very similar. And so for me, it helped me jump from one to the other and sort of make connections of like, okay, so this is doing this and this is doing that. One disconnect is that with SwiftUI, that was actually Apple moving away from classes. So the fact that, and React itself has also moved away from classes. So there's sort of some funky stuff going on in the background, but overall, you can see that they're kind of similar. Taking it a step further here, here's another SwiftUI view that has state. So you can see we've got our view state here that says hello. If you were to now tap the text, it would update that state to say goodbye, and then that would then say goodbye in the text field there. And then here that is in React. Home component, it has a message defaulted to hello. And then if they were to click on that text on click, it would set the message to goodbye. So both of these accomplishing the same goal in these two different languages, and sort of just to show that it seems like SwiftUI is very explicitly inspired by React at some level. So overall, like I said, it made the jump for me a lot easier. I tried to hop into Swift earlier on without really digging into, or SwiftUI earlier on without really digging into Swift, and ran into a lot of gotchas, because it's still a good thing to have a good grounding in the language itself before you try to use a framework. I think the same can be said for React, where it's probably a good idea to have some JavaScript experience before you start using that. Although I know a lot of people have just jumped straight into React and then sort of picked up the JavaScript as they went. But the cool thing about these is, as I say here, SwiftUI makes Apple platform development easier by learning the right lessons from React. The interesting thing to me is that I feel that these declarative languages have brought programming closer to the UI layout, like design, than any programming has before. And I think that's a very powerful thing. In fact, this conversation happened very recently on Twitter, where Michael Chan here was you don't need to read all this. Michael Chan was saying that he thinks that JavaScript is not what, like, basically everybody's on the JavaScript right now. React is huge, but you shouldn't get attached to it, because the goal of React is that side of things, the front end development side of things, goes away. A good design tool should be able to fill that role just as well by letting you like drag in React components and hook them together and stuff. And Dan Abramoff here, a React core team member, built upon that statement, saying the end game of React is basically to have these different tools where you can have visual editors that let you build these things without actually having to touch the code itself. So I found that very interesting. And in some ways, I thought, so that's where React is heading. I think Apple may have actually leapfrogged them a little bit in this regard, because Apple has this amazing tool. Back to this quote here, SwiftUI works seamlessly with new Xcode tools. They have Xcode, which is their IDE for working with and building apps. And actually just last year, I believe they released, well, did I cover that? I might be missing a slide. Oh, here's my notes for this. Okay, last year Apple released Xcode 11, and that actually came with some very powerful features that Xcode didn't have before. I don't know if any of you have tried to work with Xcode in the past, but there were fans of it, but I found it pretty difficult to work with, especially in like Objective-C land. They had their interface builder UI and stuff like that, but you had to you still had to know like a lot of in-depth like Objective-C, how to work with Objective-C and like dragging lines different places and stuff like that. It was pretty complex. But with Xcode 11, they actually introduced a lot of cool stuff. The biggest one for me was Xcode Canvas. So this bridged a gap where in the past, if you wanted to create an app, you would pretty much have to run it in a simulator on your machine. And if you wanted to see the changes, it would have to rebuild the entire thing and run it in that simulator. And it was a pretty slow, annoying process. But I guess at the time, people didn't really know what they're missing. But there was a better model for this development, and that was if you had been working on the web for like the past 6, 7, 8 years, or maybe even longer, we've had live refresh or hot reloading. Basically, as you're working, you make a change, it updates live in the web browser. And that's what this basically brings to Xcode, where you're able to modify your code in here, and that will update in the preview. And you can actually even have a functional version of the app that will update as you make changes. And that part is very cool. And that sort of closes that gap between the two. The other thing that Xcode has, and this isn't new with Xcode 11, but they have a component or view library. And obviously React doesn't have anything like this, because React is working with basically everything that the web has, which is not a limited set. I mean, it is a limited set, but it's a very large and diverse limited set of elements. Whereas in Xcode, they've got their button, text, etc., and you're able to use the Xcode library search, and even let you just drag and drop straight from it here into your code. And they've got auto completion that lets you easily hook it up to your existing code. And it's just a much nicer process for developing your app, and sort of is probably as close as we are currently to what Dan Abramoff was saying in that quote, where a good design tool should be able to just let you piece together UI, and you should be able to figure out in that way. So I've found that to be huge. I've tried using, I think I mentioned this, I've tried using Xcode intermittently over the last maybe like 5 years or so, and it has improved significantly because of these things and more. It's just become a very nice tool to use for development. Obligatory Pokedex app. Everyone builds a Pokedex app when they're learning the language. So here is mine. I got to cut out of presentation mode here to show it. 1 second. Okay. So here's an example of an app I've been building for fun with my new SwiftUI learnings. Basically grabs a bunch of Pokemon from a JSON file and lets you interact with them in different ways. You're able to search, mark them as having been caught or not caught. And I added a fancy icon and stuff like that. So that's a quick demo, and I might dive into the code a little bit as well. Let me see if I lost my notes here. Here we go. Oop. There they are. Okay. Those things like to get away from you. Okay. Okay. I'm getting into how I've been learning SwiftUI, and this actually skipped a slide for me. Oh no, it didn't. I must be missing a slide. Okay, I've been using 100 Days of SwiftUI is what the course is called. It's on a website called hackingwithswift.com. The interesting thing about that is they sort of take a different approach to learning from what I've seen on other online courses. They embrace the methodology of like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so therefore it's 100 days. They give you a set amount to learn each day. It's about an hour's worth of learning. And they very, very, very strongly recommend that you do not work ahead because they see that as like, it's probably not going to stick in your head as well. It's just good to sleep on the content that you've learned for the day so that you can keep building on that the next day. And I found that to be true. It just sort of sets a nice pace for learning where you don't like try to do like 6 hours of learning in a day and then you're just totally burned out and you don't want to touch SwiftUI again. So I found that to be interesting. The other piece of it that has been nice is, and I can jump to how it looks here. That's the website. The other huge thing is that it's free, so I didn't have to pay for it. It's very in depth. It covers pretty much everything as far as I know so far. I'm not quite halfway through, so it's going to go even farther. But I feel like I've learned a lot at this point. And the other cool thing is that it's very applied learning like method as well. In that we're building projects as we're going through these and learning new things. So I think at this point, over the course of the 100 or 47 days I'm at so far, I've probably built a dozen apps, and that feels good. It's nice to be able to run an app on your phone that you've put together and see that you're able to put something together that works. So yeah, and the other thing is that between every few projects, they have a consolidation day where you just kind of review everything that you learned. And that also sets you up to continue to build on that going forward as well for the next projects. So that is that part of the presentation. I was thinking I would try to write some SwiftUI here. I'm not as prepared for this, so we'll see how that goes. Here's Xcode right here. I've got it running. And you can see that we've got our, we're importing Swift. This is our content view. That's our main view for the app. It's got text, hello world right there. And what every SwiftUI file has is this content is a preview struct. And this is entirely dedicated to displaying this preview here. So this doesn't actually ship with the app, but you're able to use this to generate multiple views. You can actually, so we've got our one view here. You're able to do like, what is it, prefers color scheme, dark. And so we're able to preview it in dark mode there, and updating is paused. So if we resume that, it'll update as we do it. So we've got our dark mode there. We can actually show multiple previews at a time. So let's see if I do that. You might complain about that. Yep. We got to do a VStack. And what VStack is just a layout component. Oh, and actually, that's not right because I'm just putting two content views in that one struct, so I might need to create a separate one here. Or maybe I'm actually supposed to create a list of previews in the thing there. Okay, that's not gonna work. But anyway, so it is possible to create multiple previews where you can just have them all laid out here and you're able to see your view that you're building both in light mode, in dark mode, in different languages. all at the same time. So I could be updating, adding a component or a view up here. I could be changing the colors of the text, adding a list, and you see that in all 3 views in the different versions. And it's just sort of a nice way to say like, okay, I've added what I want and it doesn't break it in any of these other views or view styles that I want to see it in. So that part is cool. Let me pull up. Yes. So very quickly, we can very quickly hook up some state here. So for SwiftUI, it's got a similar concept. It has state similar to how a React component does. As you saw in my example, I could say state private var. Private is optional. It's recommended just because the assumption is that this state will not be used outside of this component. So I can say message there. And then to make this a 2-way binding, it's very simple. All you have to do is, and I guess I'll show the library here. This is what the library looks like. You hit the plus up here, that's our library, and you can search for what we want. We want a text field. And you can simply drag that right to the line you want it. And there you've got a text field. It provides you with these literally just spots you can drop in the information you want. So the placeholder here, I'm not sure that will actually be displayed since we are providing a default message here, which is just empty. And then for the value, we could say that it is message. And what this $sign does is it automatically creates a 2-way binding between our state and this field. So if I were to update this field in the UI, that would update the state, which would then update the view. It creates this back and forth between the two and connects them. And right now this is complaining because a view has to return one thing, I guess. So I just need to wrap this in, say, an H stack. And an H stack will lay them out horizontally. A V stack will lay them out vertically. So there's that. And let's resume again. It will stop. It will pause the running there, depending on the changes you're making. So that's why I have to hit that. So there's our, okay, and I actually have to run this preview. There. Okay. So right now it's running it, or we're starting it up. And maybe it'll take a little bit of time. Any questions while I'm waiting for this? Okay. That seems to be taking some time. I haven't actually run this on my work computer yet, so this is all a little bit different because my personal computer is running the next version of Xcode, which has buttons in different places, but it's mostly the same. So there's simulator, that's booting up. The other thing we can look at, okay. No, that didn't miss the map. It's stuck in the preview there. Okay, so we've got our text field. I guess I could change this to have some text there so we can see that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, for sure.
I don't know a ton about Swift, but am I looking at this right in that body is just a field in the content view struct? So this is just a data structure, more or less?
Basically, it's a computed property. So this is a struct, which is just like a data type. And body, all SwiftUI components or views need to have this body on it,
okay,
so that it knows what to return.
The view protocol or whatever it's called here, more or less an abstract class requires body to be in there.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. I think.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here we go. We've got a placeholder, and so I can say goodbye. And because I have an H deck, they're just being displayed horizontally, so next to each other. So we've got our two-way binding there. Message, or this is the input, this type of input, and then that is reflected in our text there. And is also reflected in our input as well, because that's where we're typing in. Yeah, and then I can also quickly add a modifier. So foreground color, green. Yeah, and there is a lot of like interesting things with Swift going on here. For instance, this is actually a shorthand for color.green. Because this foreground color is expecting a color, it sort of knows that that's what to expect, and so we can simply remove that, and it knows like, oh, the dot green is referring to color, and then like quickly updated there to be a green hello. And then, so that was a very quick demo. Here's an example of one that I created through the course. It's called WeSplit. Basically, is a tip calculator. We've got our content view, which conforms to the view protocol. It's got state. It has a list of possible percentage amounts. Total per person. That's a computed value, and just like our body is here. So you can see basically when our view is computed, it will figure these out on the fly based on this other information that is available. And that's the same with the body. So you can sort of think of these as similar things, except this returns simply a number, whereas this returns the view. The body returns the view to be displayed. Yeah, and in here you can kind of see text field, as I showed, keyboard type. That's a modifier. It specifies the type of keyboard to display when they tap on that input. So in this case, we want them to choose a number. So the decimal pad will be displayed and let them pick a number. And decimal pad, I suppose that's specifically for a money amount. This one would be just a number, like a phone, that sort of input. Although I guess I would assume that there is a specific keyboard type for a phone number. Picker style is a modifier of that. It lets you pick the style of your picker. A picker is basically a list of options that you can choose from. Yeah, let me quickly add a navigation view here. Navigation view is a very frequently used view that lets you quickly add obviously it's mainly for navigation, but it also lets us add a title to our page. So example, why not? That's a fun title. And I guess this probably never actually ran here. That's okay. All right. Yeah, and then I was also just going to briefly show this is all stuff that is, it's not a private repo, so I can definitely link to these to check out after this. This is my Pokedex component. A cool thing about this is that it uses a lot of the stuff that I learned during the course, and I was actually able to slowly iterate on it and improve it as I was taking the course to improve how I was handling these navigation bar items. This would just be like a button at the top of the page that users can interact with to display different things, tap gestures, stuff like that. But additionally, on top of that, I was able to dig even beyond the course and quickly look up oh, I want to have a tab bar at the bottom of my app. So I'm just going to look at how SwiftUI recommends doing that. They recommend having an app view, and you can see here, this is just the tabs. Each of these represents one of those buttons at the bottom of your app, and tapping any one of those will load that view that you want to show. So we've got our main view that shows the list of Pokemon that you need to catch yet. These are the ones that I have caught. This is just a list informational page, and then the search page. But this, I mean, this is a very simple thing to build. As you can see, it's just it's just a list of menu bar items, and then each of those has a view associated with it. It's very, I guess I won't say simple, but you can sort of see how the app will look in the code, which is nice. So yeah, and that is everything I had for this presentation. So any other questions about SwiftUI? Again, I'm still a bit of a novice, still learning this, but it's been a lot of fun to learn. So
I think it's pretty cool. Not too many UI like frameworks. Well, a lot of them expressly use JavaScript, which means they can't use typing to like heavily define how things are laid out. So
yeah,
that's kind of a cool thing. Swift also has a similarity in lineage to Go, so it actually is really
right. I could definitely
it's visibly understandable to I think a lot of us in this room.
Yeah, no, it's probably a very good language for Go developers to write React for just Apple devices, that's all Go developers, right?
Yeah,
that's the question I'm always asking myself.
It's like we're all just like itching to write Apple apps.
It's interesting how long like you were showing the design tools and what Dan Abramov had to say about like, you know, a good design tool, you should just be able to, especially because everything is becoming so componentized and just the drag and drop features. It's crazy to think how long like software has been trying to solve that. I can remember way back in the day with Visual Studio and Microsoft trying to solve that with web forms. And like, I remember when it came out, that was everybody's like, oh, this is going to make app development so much easier and you'll drag and drop and it'll work perfectly. And like, here we are like 20 years later, still.
And then like shortly after, Google's quit like GWT libraries and stuff.
Oh, I didn't use that one.
Yeah, it was the same kind of promise, but kind of just garbage.
Yeah.
Hopefully someday they'll like really solve that.
Let's not talk about quit. I've still got PTSD from it.
If they ever make that actually good, they're not going to pay us so much anymore.
Yeah, the thing I find really interesting about this is that, I mean, in all of those examples, or I mean, maybe this isn't true, but they tried to make a new tool specifically for this, whereas Xcode has existed forever, and they just sort of were able to build on that to make this possible, which maybe is why it will be more successful. I guess like it feels like it is successful already at what it's trying to do, which is cool, but yeah, sort of a difference in approach there. Any other questions?
I hit the clap button in Zoom.
Okay, thanks.
It's not quite the same as in-person applause.
The clap button needs to like audibly like have it to it.
Like a laugh track.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for presenting that. I'm going to hit stop recording.